Hey, what a joy to be in Davis Diamond. Would you just help me thank one more time our Aggie softball team for letting us be here tonight? Let me just say, please don't let tonight be the only time that you find yourself in Davis Diamond this year. Get out and support Aggie softball. I will be here. I'll bring my kids, and we can't wait to cheer you guys on. Well, Catherine and I, we got married on October 14, 2006, and we had an incredible wedding because all of our family and friends were in the same place at the same time, and they were all obligated to bring us gifts. That's the beauty about getting married, is you get to register, and you basically get to tell people, you need to buy me this. And I love it. It's a beautiful thing. It's a magical thing. Guys, make sure you let the girls do the registering. You stay out of the way, but you just say, whatever you want, I agree. That's your role in everything regarding marriage. But we had an incredible wedding, and then we had an incredible wedding reception. It was really next level because I'm half Palestinian, and so I don't know if you've ever seen any TV shows or movies where there's like a Middle Eastern wedding where people, the bride and groom, get lifted up on chairs or on people's shoulders, and people circle up and start yelling and chanting, and some uncle pulls out a drum and starts playing it. Like, that was our wedding reception. And so, like, my sister-in-law's high school friends came to our wedding reception, and they all left saying, I want to marry an Egyptian. And I was like, I'm not Egyptian, but I hope that goes well for you. Good luck with all the desires of your heart. But Catherine and I finished our wedding and our wedding reception. Then we took our honeymoon to the Caribbean. We went to St. Lucia, and it was blissful. And then we came home, and we played hard for our first year of marriage. During our first year of marriage, we went to St. Lucia for our honeymoon. We went to Puerto Rico. We went to Italy. We went to Florida. We went to California because we wanted to play hard. And we gained the marriage 15. Like, some of you guys are working on the freshman 15, where you gain 15 pounds from eating only cafeteria food and sleeping more than you've ever slept in your life. We gained the marriage 15 because all we ate was good food. And so we found ourselves just with this an incredible first year of marriage. And it was interesting because along the way, people would tell us, you know what, the first year of marriage is the hardest year of marriage. And we were like, really? Because if this is as hard as it's going to get, we are crushing this thing called marriage. And we would find ourselves in conversation with other newlyweds, and we would say, hey man, how's married life going? Are you enjoying it? And here's how they would respond. I specifically remember talking to this guy, and here's what his response was, yeah, I mean, it's good. It's an adjustment. And I'm like, okay, clearly you're not experiencing what we're experiencing because we're in a different stratosphere than you guys when it comes to marriage. So we were like, we might as well just start counseling people on how to do this thing called marriage because we're kind of writing the book on it right now. But then we turned from chapter 1 to chapter 2. We got into year 2 of marriage, and Catherine and I had bigger fights than we had ever had in our marriage. And we began to realize, oh, marriage is awesome. Marriage is incredible. I'm a huge fan of marriage, but marriage can actually be work too. And now we're about to celebrate 13 years of marriage, and I would stand by what I said in year 2 of marriage. Marriage is incredible. I'm a firm believer in it. I actually highly recommend it. I still consider myself a poster child for the how did that guy get that girl foundation. I love being married to Catherine. We have an incredible marriage, but we have a very imperfect marriage. So if you've been here on Tuesday nights and you've heard me share different stories and you're like, oh my gosh, he's a pastor, so their marriage must be flawless, I don't know who you think I am. But we have a very imperfect marriage. We love marriage, but marriage is hard work. It's extremely hard work. See, there's this phase in any relationship that's called the honeymoon phase. The honeymoon phase is a really sweet phase. It's that blissful phase at the beginning of a marriage where everything works, everything is easy, and everything is as it should be. The honeymoon phase lasts anywhere from 1 day to 1 year. Catherine and my honeymoon phase probably lasted about a year. The average lifespan of a honeymoon phase for the average relationship is about 3 months. 3 months until the blinders get pulled off your eyes and you begin to see, okay, marriage is good. Marriage is awesome, but it isn't always easy, and marriage can be hard work. And the reason that I even bring this up is I just don't know that everyone in this place that's planning to get married actually thinks about that. Like, you hear that said, that marriage is hard work, and you hear that, but you don't necessarily believe that, or you begin to think it's going to be work for other people, but not for us. So I just need you to understand, whenever you choose to get married, whoever you stand on the altar with, that's actually the person that you're choosing to fight with for the rest of your life. Like, have you ever thought about that? See, no one ever sits there in dreams. It's like, oh my gosh, I just can't wait till we get to fight together. Like, ladies, if you've got a ring on your finger already, are you sitting there with your gal pal saying, oh my gosh, our fights are going to be amazing? No, because no one thinks about that. But you need to know it's not a question of if you'll fight, it's a question of how will you fight. Like, in preparation for this talk, Catherine and I had our last fight Sunday, like just 2 days ago. Because fighting is a reality of marriage. And here's the good news, and I think some of y'all need to hear it. Fighting doesn't have to be a bad thing. It can actually be a God thing. Like, conflict is a part of marriage. Conflict doesn't have to be a bad thing. It can actually be a God thing, but you need to know how to do it well. Catherine and I are 13 years into marriage, and we're still figuring out how to fight well. That's the goal of tonight. In some ways, I want to save your marriage before it even begins. And if you're sitting there saying, I'm not thinking about marriage. Like, marriage is like whatever you think is a long way off, it's longer than that for me. Wherever you're at, my goal isn't to just save your marriage. My goal is to save any friendship, any relationship in your life that is being threatened by conflict. Like, if you're here tonight and you're the type of person who responds to conflict by shutting down, or cutting people out of your life, or giving people the silent treatment, or exploding in anger, I promise you, tonight's talk, you need it now. And so let's talk about conflict together. If you have a Bible, turn with me tonight to the Song of Solomon. If you don't know where the Song of Solomon in Scripture is, don't hesitate to use your table of contents, but turn to the Song of Solomon, chapter 5. Chapter 5 is where we're going to be. If you were with us last week, then what you saw, it was an interesting week. It was kind of a creepy week. Like, God allowed us to be flies on the wall within the honeymoon suite for Solomon and his girl. Like, we watched them have sex together. Creepy, but it's the Word of God. And all Scripture is profitable for teaching, so we're going to go for it. But anyway, that's where we left off last week. We left off in chapter 5, verse 1. Now, we're going to pick it up in chapter 5, verse 2. What you need to know is some time has passed between verse 1 and verse 2. We don't know how much time has passed, but we know now that Solomon and his girl are into marriage. I studied 11 different sources to make sure I had my mind around what was happening in this passage. You need to know that commentators go one of two ways. Some people believe that Solomon's girl in this passage is in a dream. Other people think that she's experiencing everything that she talks about in reality. I'm going to take a hybrid approach. There's going to be times where she's awake. There's going to be times that she's dreaming. In the end, please don't get hung up on whether she's dreaming or awake. The application is the same. We're going to find ourselves in the middle of this conflict between Solomon and his girl, and we're going to learn how to fight in a way that's actually glorifying to God. So here we go. Song of Solomon, chapter 5, verse 2. Here's what she says. She says, I slept, but my heart was awake. So what does that mean? What does that sound like? That sounds like a restless night. She's in and out of consciousness. And as she is sleeping, there's a knock at the door, and it's Solomon, her husband, knocking at the door. And what does it say? She says, a sound My beloved is knocking. Open to me, my sister, my love, my dove, my perfect one. For my head is wet with dew, my locks with the drops of the night. What does that sound like? That sounds like a man who wants to make sweet love to his wife. Like, that's actually exactly what is happening here. Solomon is getting home late from a long day at work. He comes to the door, he knocks, and he's ready to get busy. So what does he do? He pulls out all of his best material. I mean, listen to what he's saying. Open to me, my sister, my love, my dove, my perfect one. When was the last time we heard Solomon use those exact words? Last chapter, on their wedding night. He's like, man, if this is going to happen, I'm going to have to dig deep. I'm going to have to pull out the wedding material. But the response from his wife is different this time. Look at her response, verse 3. She said, I had put off my garment. How could I put it on? I had bathed my feet. How could I soil them? And so it's interesting because she's basically saying, look, I've already gotten ready for bed. Notice she doesn't even get up from the bed to open the door to let him in. I don't know if she just went silent and didn't say anything. It was like, if I wait long enough, he'll go away. I don't know if she was like, thank you, next, but I am actually asleep. Like, I don't know what the response was. All I know is that she was basically like, this isn't happening tonight. Let me just share this with you for fun. Ladies, you need to know that every wife in the world has clothing that she wears to bed at night that is extremely comfortable for you to wear, but very uncomfortable for your husband to look at. Like, I'm just shooting you straight. All women have it. It might be like an oversized old t-shirt that you actually have right now. It might be some nasty pair of pants that you have. For us in our marriage, it was a pair of pants for my wife, Catherine. She had this pair of pants that we called her genie pants. I don't know why we called them that. There was nothing magical about these pants, I'll tell you that. But they were these green, shiny pants that ballooned out. The only people who deserved to wear these were Aladdin or MC Hammer. I don't know if you know who MC Hammer is, but those are the only two people who deserve to wear these pants. But anytime Catherine was wearing those genie pants, here's the realization I had. Tonight is not my night. And so here this girl is in bed. She's like, I already got the genie pants on. Like, I've already washed my face. I've even washed my feet. How could I get up to let you in now? And so, verse 4, she says this, my beloved put his hand to the latch, and my heart was thrilled within me. I arose to open to my beloved, and my hands dripped with myrrh, my fingers with liquid myrrh on the handles of the bolt. I opened to my beloved, but my beloved had turned and gone. My soul failed me when he spoke. I sought him, but found him not. I called him, but he gave me no answer. And so all eyes on me, here's what's happening. She's laying in bed. She hears Solomon from outside the door. She's basically shutting it down like tonight's not his night. But then she begins to realize she has a change of heart. And she begins to realize that she didn't respond in a way that was honoring or loving to her husband. Now, let me just make sure you hear what I'm not saying. What I'm not saying is that anytime a husband wants to have sex, the wife should have sex. That's not what I'm saying. Are there times when it's okay when a woman is not in the mood? Absolutely. This isn't about whether or not she wanted to have sex. Now it's all about how she responded in the moment. She's realizing, I could have responded better than I did. I was selfish in my response. I didn't even want to get up and open the door to just look my husband in the eyes to say, hey babe, I love you, but maybe tomorrow. No, she just laid in bed. And so she is realizing, you know what, I could have responded differently. And so she gets dressed and she goes to the door and she opens the door. But by that time, Solomon is gone. And she calls for Solomon, but he's already gone. And for the first time in 5 chapters, we see a disconnect between Solomon and his girl. For the first time, there's separation between the two of them. Now, let me tell you why I love this passage of the Song of Solomon. I love this because this is God's picture of the ideal relationship. This is God's instruction manual on finding love, making love, and maintaining love. Even in God's ideal relationship, there is conflict. Do you see that? Even in God's ideal relationship, there is conflict. And the reason that I think that's so important is for two reasons. Number one, some of you here tonight are putting weight on marriage that marriage cannot handle. Like you are saddling marriage with weight that it was never meant to bear. You believe that marriage is the thing that will make you fulfilled and complete. Like you believe marriage is either going to be a fairy tale or a rom-com. That it's all magical, it's all romance, and everything always works, and you always feel in love. And because of that, marriage is what you need to feel satisfied, whole, and complete. The only problem with that understanding of marriage is you negate the fact that marriage is two imperfect people coming together and having to figure out life. Like you're an imperfect person. So I don't mean to bust your Bible, but you need to know that you are going to bring pride and insecurity and various struggles into your marriage. And so is your spouse. And so you guys are going to have to figure that out together. The second reason that I love this passage is that some of you guys grew up around such unhealthy marriages that you've become skeptical of marriage or you've given up on marriage altogether. And some of you here have developed an aversion to all type of conflict. If there's any conflict, you believe something seriously is wrong. And so I just need to remind you that conflict doesn't have to be a bad thing. It can actually be a God thing. What's God's point for your life? Like, why do you exist? God's goal for your life is for you to look as much like Jesus Christ as possible. Do you know how God will use marriage? God will use marriage to expose the areas, the attitudes, the actions of your life that are not in sync with Jesus Christ. I still remember in my first year of marriage, I can still put myself in our apartment and where I was sitting on our back patio, and God just blew up my world through my marriage. He was like, "You know you're selfish, right?" And I was like, "Wait, what?" Like, I'm one of the good Christian guys. Like, I know Philippians 2 where I consider, other people more important than myself, and I do nothing out of selfish ambition. He's like, no. You're selfish. And I was like, oh, that's what marriage does, is it exposes you. And then you have kids and you're like, man, I am really selfish. Like, I thought I was selfish. This is whole nother realms of selfishness. God, I don't want to go down the selfishness rabbit hole anymore. I get the point. Thank you. God will use marriage to refine your life. He'll use it. He will use conflict to make you more like Jesus. But I want you to think about this. The message of Christianity, the gospel of Jesus Christ, is actually a message about forgiveness and reconciliation. So what that means is when we enter into conflict and we choose to forgive and reconcile, do you know what it means? It means that even through conflict, we can make Jesus and his message look very attractive to the world. Because we are showing the world that we've experienced forgiveness, so we express forgiveness. But we have to be people who learn how to do it well. Some things might have to change in our lives. The reason I say that is because there's a good chance that you have learned how to fight from watching your parents. That's not everyone in this place, but I want you to think about that. There's a possibility that you have learned how to fight from watching your parents. So just think about how you fight now. How do you conflict? How do you engage in conflict with your roommates or with your friends? You might be one of those people who shuts down. You might shut people out. You might give people the silent treatment. You might sweep things under the rug and never talk about it. You might be one of those people who explode in anger. Do you see that in either of your parents? If you can look and think, oh, I kind of do what my mom does. I didn't realize it, but that's actually what my dad does. If you can see that correlation at all, then just ask this question. Do your parents have a healthy marriage? If the answer is no, then what makes you think that you can do the same thing and have a different outcome? So some change might need to happen in your life, and that's the goal of tonight, is for us to work together to figure out how to thrive in the midst of conflict. Okay, so look back at the text. In my opinion, and I could be totally wrong, in the end, it doesn't matter whether she's awake or asleep. I personally believe that she gets back in bed and falls asleep, and in her dream, God is going to show her his way to reconciliation. So just look in verse 7, look at what it says. It says, the watchman found me. So the picture is that she goes out searching for Solomon. Verse 7 says, the watchman found me as they went about in the city. They beat me, they bruised me, they took away my veil, those watchmen of the walls. The reason that I believe that she's dreaming is that if she's married to Solomon, then she's queen. No watchmen are going to beat the queen, because they would get beat for beating the queen. So what I think that this beating from the watchman symbolizes is, I think it symbolizes the conviction of God. Like in her sleep, in her dream, God is actually convicting her, just speaking into her life about the way that she responded to Solomon. Again, this isn't about whether or not she was willing to have sex. That's not what this is about. It's about her response. Her response, and just to be clear, I don't think that their conflict is this massive conflict. I don't think it's a huge deal, but I think it's a deal that they had to work through. And what we see is we see God speaking in to her conflict with Solomon. The reason that I need you to see that God is speaking in is that anytime you engage in conflict with one of your friends or one of your roommates, or when you get married and you find yourself in conflict, if you want to choose between a 2-minute discussion with your spouse or a 2-hour argument with your spouse, those are two different things. A 2-minute conversation or a 2-hour argument. The key is to let God speak to you about your conflict. God must have a voice in the middle of your conflict. And so write this down. I hope that you're taking notes. If you want to thrive in marriage, then you have to learn that the best thing for you to do is put yourself in a situation where God is speaking into your conflict so that you can, write this down, respond to God instead of react to the other person. See, so many of us here, we're reactors, right? We want to react to what someone says to us. So if they say something mean to us, we want to say something mean to them. If they're trying to beat me, I'm going to try and beat them. If they're trying to win the argument, I'm going to try and win the argument. If they insult me, I'm going to insult them back. We are reactors. But you want to move from a 2-hour argument to a 2-minute discussion, 2-minute conversation, then first respond to God. Let God speak into your argument. Let me just give you 3 questions to ask yourself when you find yourself in the middle of conflict. I promise, trust me, if you ask God these 3 questions, it will be a game changer for your marriage. First question to ask God, to let him speak in on, is this: God, am I assuming the best of my spouse? Like when Catherine and I get into a fight, the best thing for me to do is stop and think, like, is Catherine really out to get me right now? Like, is she trying to take me down? Like, is she trying to ruin my life? Did she do that intentionally to hurt me? The answer is always no. Like, what if Catherine just wasn't thinking in that moment? Like, what if in that moment, Catherine didn't mean to hurt me or to do that? It just happened. It was an accident. It wasn't intentional. But in my mind, I'm thinking, okay, here she is. She's out to get me. She's out to destroy me. That is not assuming the best. That's actually assuming the worst. when you assume the worst, when you believe that someone's out to get you, all it does is put lighter fluid on the wrong type of fire. We talked about the right type of fire last week, but there is a fire that will burn your marriage to the ground. So you need to ask yourself the question, am I assuming the best? The second good question to ask yourself is this: am I majoring in a minor? My good friend Blair Browning likes to say, don't major in minors. Don't major in minors. Just ask yourself the question, is this really that big of a deal? Like, I'm working with that with my kids right now. Like, I use my hands. I'm like, okay, when they're freaking out about something, I say, hey, let's just ask this question. Is this a small deal or a big deal? And are you having a small response or a big response? If this is a small deal, but you're having a big response to a small deal, then let's just get some perspective here. So maybe you need to start using your hands when you're in conflict and you're like, is this a small deal or a big deal? Okay, yeah, okay, I need to, you can just start, people think you're crazy. They'll see you like this, but it's okay. He'll talk you off the ledge. You just need to ask yourself, am I majoring in the minors right now? Don't major in the minors. If it's not that big of a deal, get some thicker skin. If your skin is paper thin, you're going to need to get something else. The third question for you to ask yourself is this: am I at fault in any way? Am I at fault in any way? Like, you might be the offended. Someone might have done something to hurt you, but it's still good for you to ask, am I at fault in any way? Like, have you let bitterness fester? Because if you've let bitterness fester, I guarantee you, you're not treating that person who has hurt you right. And you're going to need to apologize for it, but are you at fault in any way? See, our tendency is to only see what other people have done to us. But when we can learn to look at what we have done, it can change everything. So if you ask God, am I at fault in any way? And if God reveals something to you that you need to apologize for, then you need to apologize. I promise you, if you want your marriage to last, did you hear what I just said? If you actually want your marriage to last, I promise you, you're going to have to get good at saying the words, I'm sorry, and will you forgive me? Like, let's just practice that right now. Let's all say, I'm sorry, on the count of 3. 1, 2, 3. I'm sorry. Very good. Now let's all say, I forgive you, on the count of 3. 1, 2, 3. I forgive you. Very good. Man, you guys are awesome. Some of you guys hate that I just made us do that. You're like, that's so dumb. But do you want to know why I did that? Because if that's the first time those words have come out of your mouth in a long time, I promise you, you're a difficult person to live with. Like, if that's the first time those words have come out of your mouth in a long time, I assure you, you're a difficult person to live with. Trust me. Let me just tell you the 3 most miserable people to be married to. The 3 most miserable people to be married to are the I'm right and you're wrong person, the I'm sorry but person, and the I'm sorry but I'm not really sorry person. The I'm right and you're wrong person is the person who's just unashamedly like, you're wrong, I'm right. That explains itself. The second person, the I'm sorry but person, is the person who's like, you know what, I'm sorry I did that. But the reason that I did that is because you did that. The third person, the I'm sorry but I'm not really sorry person, is the worst person. That's the person who says, you know what, hey, I'm sorry you got your feelings hurt. That's not an apology. That's actually like a subtle slap in the face. That's what that is. Hey, it's like, you know what, I'm sorry. I am so sorry. That you got your feelings hurt. 3 most miserable people to be married to. I assure you, if your marriage is going to last, you will have to learn how to apologize. Ask God these 3 questions. And what you want to do is you want to respond to God. If God begins to tell you, you know what, you're majoring in a minor right now. You know what, you're assuming the worst, not the best. You know what, you are at fault. Keep your side of the street clean. That person you're fighting with they need to get their side of the street clean too. And they owe you an apology, but you let me deal with them. I'm dealing with you now, and you need to apologize. Okay. Verse 8. I think she's still dreaming, and I'll tell you why in just a second. Verse 8, she says this, I adjure you, she begins to talk to her gal pals. I don't know if, ladies, that's what y'all call each other. Anyway, I just assume that y'all do. She says, I adjure you, O daughters of Jerusalem, if you find my beloved, that you tell him I am sick with love. The reason that I think she's still dreaming here is that she goes to her friends and is basically like, will you help me find my man? Well, if Solomon is the king of Israel, I doubt that she needs her girl squad to be the people who actually find the king of Israel. But the real reason that I think she's still dreaming is because when she says that she is sick with love in the Hebrew, that actually implies sexual frustration. Ladies, do you guys call each other and they're like, man, have you seen, just imagine getting married and then calling your friend and being like, hey, have you seen my man? If you see him, tell him to rush home because we need to make sweet love. Hey, how are your kids doing? Is everything okay with you? How weird would that be? No, she's still dreaming. And what's happening in this dream is I want you to watch this. God is actually using her dream to show her the right way to proceed in the middle of conflict. So in verse 9, watch what happens. Her friends begin to speak, and what do they say? They say, what is your beloved more than another beloved? O most beautiful among women, what is your beloved more than another beloved, that you thus adjure us? She's talking with her friends, and what's the question that her friends ask her? Don't you think you could do better? Like, you're the most beautiful woman in town. I just wonder, do you think you could do better than Solomon? It's worth thinking about. Could you find a better man? Do you think you married the wrong person in the first place? And so what God is doing here is he's actually in her dream, he's using this girl's friends to bring up a question that she might actually ask herself in reality. But God leads her in her dream, and look at how she responds in the dream. She immediately just begins to think about all of the things that she loves about her husband. So if you think about it, back in chapter 4, we were in their honeymoon suite, and what did Solomon do? He started at the top of her head and worked her way down, or he worked his way down her body. We see her do that now about Solomon. So listen to what she says. Ladies, take notes. She says, my beloved is radiant and ruddy, distinguished among 10,000. She's saying he's one of a kind. There's no one else like him. His head is the finest gold. His locks are wavy, black as a raven. She's talking about his hair. I don't know if you remember last week. He was like, baby, your hair's like goats. Now she's like, well, your hair's like ravens. This is weird culture, people. But anyway, that's what they do. She loves his hair. Now she uses his material back on him. She says his eyes are like doves beside streams of water, bathed in milk, sitting beside a full pool. Put that in your Valentine's note. Creepy. Anyway, verse 13. Now she's talking about the same things he talked about. She moves from his eyes to his hair. The only thing she doesn't mention is his teeth, but she says, verse 13, his cheeks are like beds of spices, mounds of sweet-smelling herbs. She's talking about his beard, saying it smells really good. His lips are lilies, dripping liquid gold. Now watch this, guys. How would you like for a girl to say this about you? I'll tell you this, Catherine's never said this about me. I can assure you that. Verse 14, his arms are rods of gold. It's never happened in my marriage. Set with jewels. His body is polished ivory, bedecked with sapphires. Now, if you want to know if Solomon's body is supported by 2 twigs in the place of legs, or if you think he has cankles, guess again. Verse 15, his legs are alabaster columns set on bases of gold. Come on, ladies. Write this down. Kat, if you're watching online, take some notes. I'll see you soon. His appearance is like Lebanon, choice as the cedars. His mouth is most sweet. Look at this. In her dream, God is leading her dream. And the conclusion she has in her dream is, he is altogether desirable. This is my beloved and this is my friend, O daughters of Jerusalem. I love this because God is showing her in her dream how to proceed. See, most likely the question that her friends are asking her is meant to represent the question that she might internally ask herself in reality. She might be prone to comparison. And what God is saying is, you might be prone to comparison, but there's no room for comparison because comparison kills closeness. Your tendency when conflict comes might be to think, did I marry the wrong person? Could I have done better than this person? And what God is just showing her is you cannot compare your spouse to someone else's spouse, because what you have to understand is anytime you compare in your marriage, you know what you're going to do in the midst of conflict? You're going to compare the undesirable qualities of your spouse to the desirable qualities of someone else. You're going to compare what's undesirable in your man or woman to what's desirable in some other man or woman, and your spouse will never be able to compete. And so I just want you to realize that comparison kills closeness. There's no room for it. Do you want to know why divorce becomes an option between a man and a woman? It's because a man and a woman get to a place where they refuse to find anything that's still desirable in their spouse. When you find yourself in conflict, one of the best things you can do is just pause and say, can I think of one thing that I still love about this person? There's times where Catherine and I have been in a fight, and we've been in a fight for maybe, 15, 30 minutes, and I have the thought, I'm reminded about how hilarious my wife is. She's the funniest person on this planet. Like, I love laughing with Kat, and there's times where we'll be in conflict, and I begin to think, I just want to laugh with Kat. But we're spending all this time just kind of trying to win a battle and going back and forth. I'd just rather be done with this and get back to laughing. And God reminds me, this really isn't that worth it. Let's wrap this up so you can get back to the joy that I created you guys for. So one of the best things you can do is just pause and just ask yourself, what do I find? Just one thing. What's one thing that's desirable about this person? Before I move on, let me just say this. You might ask the question, is comparison healthy in dating? I still think the answer to that is no. If you want to compare your significant other in a dating relationship to anything, compare him or her to the Word of God. That's the best place to compare. Chapter 6, verses 1 through 3. In her dream, look at what happens. This is her friends talking. Where has your beloved gone, O most beautiful among women? Where is your beloved turned, that we may seek him with you? And so they're basically asking her, do you know where he is? And in her dream, she sees where he is. Verse 2, my beloved has gone down to his garden, to the beds of spices, to graze in the gardens and to gather lilies. I am my beloved's, and my beloved is mine. He grazes among the lilies. And so in her dream, she sees that Solomon is in one of his gardens working. And I love how her dream ends. Her dream ends with her saying what she said before they got married. She says, I am my beloved's, and my beloved is mine. So God ends her dream with the two of them reconciled together. And so she wakes up from her dream, and she goes to Solomon. Because what do we see in verse 4? We see Solomon and this girl together talking with one another. And so we're left to assume that she woke up and she immediately went to where Solomon is. And I love that. And we saw that at the beginning of her dream. At the beginning of the dream, what do we see? We see her on this ambitious hunt to find Solomon. What it shows us is this. Don't miss this. Be a problem solver instead of a problem spreader. See, the best thing you can do when conflict comes is go directly to the person. You're either going to solve the problem or spread the problem. Anytime Catherine and I get in a fight, here's what you need to know. My wife talks to her mom and her sisters multiple times every day. Like they have this close connection. They talk all the time and about most things. But when Catherine and I are in a conflict, Catherine never calls her mom or her sisters to complain about me. And when we're in a conflict, I never call my family or my brother or my guys to complain about Catherine. Man, we go directly to each other to solve the problem. Don't be a problem spreader, be a problem solver, because what you need to understand is anytime you take your problems to other people without the other person knowing, you know what you're going to find? You're going to find gasoline instead of a fire extinguisher. Anytime you go and spread the problem, you know what you're going to find? You're going to find other people who just pour gasoline onto the fire that will burn your marriage to the ground. You're not going to find people who are like, hey, let's put out this fire. You're going to find people who are like, yeah, he is a jerk. He is wrong. Do you really think you should be with him? You know what? If y'all need to go to someone and seek outside help, go together to counseling. Catherine and I, we've gone to marriage counseling before. I highly recommend it. We love marriage, but we still believe in marriage counseling. So if you need outside help, go together to counseling. Be a problem solver instead of a problem spreader. Who do you think talks first when they find each other? It'd be the woman, right? Because in this situation, she's the offender and he's the offended. Again, this isn't a big conflict, but in this situation, it's about how she responded. She's the offender, he's the offended. Who talks first? It's Solomon. Verse 4, what's Solomon saying? You're beautiful as tears of my love, lovely as Jerusalem, awesome as an army with banners. What does he say? He says, you're beautiful and I respect you. I love that. Guys, when you get married and you find yourself in a conflict, you always try and beat your wife to reconciliation. That doesn't mean that you ladies can't initiate reconciliation. I'm just giving the guys a charge to you be the first one to get there. And I'll tell you this, I struggle with it. Because when Kat and I are in conflict, I need about 30 minutes to myself to just process. Kat wants 2 minutes. She's like, let's talk about this. Are you ready to talk? I'm like, I'm not ready to talk. She's like, let's just solve this. Let's figure this out. So there's times where we're laying in bed at night and it's like, okay, don't let the sun go down on your anger. We're going to need to figure this out before we can go to sleep. And in my pride, internally, it's like, don't say you're sorry. Don't do it because you're going to show her she's right and you're wrong. Don't do it. And then this other voice, it's like the devil and the angel on my shoulders. The devil's like, don't do it. She's wrong. Wait for her. And then the angel's like, you know, she's going to beat you to it. If you don't say something now, she's going to beat you to it. And I'm like, oh, it feels like I'm climbing a mountain. Then Catherine's like, you know what? I'm sorry. I'm like, dang it. Why didn't I just say something? She's great at it. Guys, step up. Let's step up together. Let's lead the way when it comes to stuff like this. And then I love what Solomon does. Watch this. Let me say this before I move on. You see how Solomon is responding in this moment. How is this possible? For him to be the first one to speak and to just be like, you're beautiful and I respect you. It's because he's responding to God instead of reacting to the person. So let me just give you 3 things real quick. I hope that you write these down. I'm just going to give you 3 quick tips when it comes to conflict. Number 1, the goal isn't to be right. The goal is to be reconciled. Did you hear that? The goal is not to be right. The goal is to be reconciled. I promise you, don't miss what I'm telling you. If you need to win, you will lose. If you need to win the fight, you will lose something. You're going to lose sleep. You're going to lose time. You're going to lose someone's respect. You might lose the relationship. But if you always need to win, if you always need to be right, I promise you, if you need to win, you will lose. So the goal isn't to be right. The goal is to be reconciled. The second thing that I want you to write down is this: forgiveness is a choice. Forgiveness isn't a feeling, it's a choice. If you wait until you feel like forgiving, and if you wait until you feel like asking for forgiveness, you will never forgive and you'll never ask someone for forgiveness. Forgiveness is often a choice you make despite how you feel. And the third thing I want to make sure you write down is this: treat every offense like a first offense. Treat every offense like a first offense. There's this saying in marriage, it's called getting historical. It's where you let problems compound. It's where you keep a record of wrongs. So that's why people will lose their ever-loving minds with each other when one of them forgets to take the trash out. That's why people will bite each other's heads off when they can't figure out where to go to eat. Why? Because the problem has compounded. They've kept a record of wrongs. And so what happens is a small offense, something that's small, kind of grows over time and it becomes bigger and bigger and bigger, which means you begin to fight worse about dumb things. You don't want to be that couple that has massive fights about the dumbest things, but that happens when you don't treat every offense like it's a first offense. See, when Jesus went to the cross, what did he do? He canceled and removed your entire record of wrongs. So every day you wake up to a clean record. If God doesn't keep record of wrongs, neither should you. And then I love what Solomon does. Look at what he says, verses 5 through 7. Turn away your eyes from me, for they overwhelm me. Your hair is like a flock of goats leaping down the slopes of Gilead. Your teeth are like a flock of ewes that have come up from the washing. All of them bear twins. Not one among them has lost its young. Your cheeks are like halves of pomegranates behind your veil. Verse 8, there are 60 queens and 80 concubines and virgins without number. My dove, my perfect one, is the only one of her mother, pure to her who bore her. The young women saw her and called her blessed. The queens and concubines also, and they praised her. Do you see what Solomon does? He takes her back to their wedding night where he said the same exact things. And what's his message to her? There is no one like you. Do you see what's happening here? Conflict never changes commitment. Do you see that? Conflict never changes commitment. You need to understand a day is going to come where you're going to stand on the altar with a guy or a girl, and you guys are going to share vows before God with each other. And if you do the stereotypical vows, you're going to say something like, I so-and-so take you so-and-so to be my husband or wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, in sickness and in health, till death do us part. Do you realize what you just committed to do? You promised to take that person in sickness and in health, in good times and in bad times, in the rich times and in the poor times. So if that's true, if you make a promise that you're going to love that person in the good times and in the bad times, then you have to understand that love isn't always a feeling. Love is primarily a choice. And marriage is about choosing to love your spouse every single day. And when you make that type of vow, you know what you're saying? You're saying divorce isn't an option. Divorce isn't an option for Kat and myself. And if divorce isn't an option, you know what that means? Reconciliation's all that's left. If divorce is ruled out, the only option is reconciliation. That speeds up the conflicts. Because it's like, if we're not going anywhere, if divorce isn't an option, if splitting up isn't an option, we better figure this thing out, because I refuse to just live as two separate people in this house. No, let's come back together. Because God brought us together in the first place. What God has joined together, let not man separate. And so we're going to fight for our marriage. Instead of fighting with each other, we're going to fight together for our marriage. Why? Because we have an enemy. And if we're going to seek to honor God in our marriage, we have an enemy who's going to seek to steal, kill, and destroy. You need to know Satan's greatest desire for your marriage is divorce. And so when you come to a place where you say, I don't care if I don't feel in love today, I'm going to choose to love today, because that's what Jesus Christ has done for me. He has chosen to love me today. He has forgiven me today. He has reconciled me to the Father today. And so if that's what Jesus Christ has done for me, that's what I will do for my spouse. Will you fight for your marriage? Because you will fight. It's just a question of what you'll fight for. Jesus is the way. See, forgiven people forgive people. Jesus Christ is the one who didn't have to be right because he wanted to be reconciled. He wanted you to be reconciled. His goal wasn't to be right. His goal was for you to be reconciled. That's why he stood silently before Pilate. When people hurled insults, he stood silent so he could reconcile us to the Father. Jesus responded to God instead of reacting to the people. Jesus Christ was found in the garden saying, Father, not my will, but your will be done. And he went to the cross and endured the wrath of God for you and for me. Jesus Christ chose to forgive. God demonstrates his love for us, and that while we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. And now there's no conflict that you can think of with Jesus. There's no sin that you can bring before Jesus that would cause him to compromise his commitment to you or to me. What beautiful news. But you need to understand, forgiven people always forgive people. And when you refuse to forgive, you know what you're saying? You're saying, God, I know you could forgive me, but there's no way I can forgive this person. What this person has done to me is worse than what I've done to you. I refuse to forgive. You know what? Forgiven people forgive people. If you've experienced the forgiveness of Jesus Christ, you extend that same forgiveness. I hope you will.